What's good, my blooners? I've given up hundreds of hours of my life playing BTD6. This simple game about monkeys fighting balloons is strangely addicting. But wait, after all of my hours playing, I realized something. This game isn't simple at all. It has bizarre strategies and even races. Who actually knows that play? However, some people in my life have said this is just a baby game. You and I both know this is a preposterous, baseless claim. The truth is that this game is very complex and involves a lot of deep thinking. This game has so many layers that it's more thought-provoking than your English homework. I'll show you right now, actually. I'm not gonna pull up the BT6 lore from the Monkeykind blogs, because that's stupid, but there are many details that you definitely overlooked. You see this tower right here? The super monkey? It provides us with some disturbing knowledge. Now, what diabolical secret could this monkey possibly have? If you upgrade the top path 4 times, you get this. It's just like the one in Machu Picchu. Hit this guy one more time and you get the true sun god. This is just like the Incan sun god Inti. You can sacrifice monkeys to not only the temple but also the true sun god. Now this is just like how the Inca used human sacrifice to appease Inti. And in addition, the loading screen looks exactly like this thing. Now I believe that this is the dominant religion of BTD6, because the only evidence of other religion is Buddhism. The evidence for Buddhism existing in BTD6 is Sai, because not only does Sai look like a Buddhist monk, but also when you upgrade Sai, Sai ends up having a lotus flower, which is a symbol of Buddhism. Now in real life, the Spanish conquered much of the Americas, and including the Incas. The Spanish conquered for resources, but they also conquered to convert people to Christianity. I don't know what happened to Christianity in balloons, if it even existed in balloons, but let's just ignore that for now. So while editing this video, I realized there actually is evidence for Christianity existing, and it comes from a skin for the hero Adora, which is normally a priestess for the Sun religion, but here there is a skin that is called Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc was a peasant that led the French into defeating the English in the 100 Years' War, and she was canonized by the Catholic Church. But they had to compete with other European powers for influence over the Americas. One way they did this was by sending an expedition to the Pacific Northwest. This is known as the Voyage of Malaspina and Bustamante. I can't pronounce it, man, sorry. They sailed to the Pacific Northwest to check if other countries had settlements there. Now, this expedition didn't really yield many results, but years later, around 65 years later, the British controlled most of it. And at this point, the US was already independent, and it was getting bigger and bigger. So they jointly occupied the Northwest. However, something horrible happened on San Juan Island. An American farmer named Lemon Cutler on the island noticed a pig eating his tubers. So he shot the pig, which belonged to an Irishman named Charles Griffin, who was working with Hudson's Bay Company. Cutler offered him $10, but Griffin wanted $100. Cutler obviously declined this outrageous offer, and so British authorities tried to arrest him. But the US stepped in and they were like, "Prepare for liberation!" And things eventually escalated and there was nearly a whole conflict, but thankfully there was no actual fighting. In the end, General Winfield Scott was sent to negotiate, because there was concern about sectionalists in the South, which we'll get to later. Another very important part of the history of the Pacific Northwest is Boeing. It was created in 1916 in Seattle, and over the course of World War II they made several planes such as the B-17 Flying Fortress. This plane dropped the most bombs out of any other plane during World War II. Now this confirms that World War II happened in the Bloons universe, because the Monkey Ace's bottom half tier 5 is called the Flying Fortress, and it looks very similar. And additionally, the middle half of the Monkey Ace becomes the sided bomb. This nuke was the most powerful hydrogen bomb ever constructed, with a yield of 58 megatons, or 58 million tons of TNT. It was created during the Cold War as a way to combat the US's domination of nuclear technology, because prior to this, the US's nuclear weaponry was definitely superior to the Soviet Union's, due to their early start in the Manhattan Project. It was actually a means of propaganda for the Soviet Union, in order for them to appear ahead of the US in terms of nuclear capability. and maintain the facade of nuclear deterrence. But this nuke is only one of many significant points throughout the Cold War. It was anything but cold. There was a lot of hostility between the US and the USSR as they fought for global influence. They had the nuclear arms race, psychological warfare, propaganda campaigns, espionage, far-reaching embargoes, and technological competition like the space race. This was a time of uncertainty, as both superpowers had nukes, which led to situations like the Cuban Missile Crisis, which were so close to ending the world, and would literally have us playing Fallout in real life if they actually went wrong. But let's go back to the space race. In this game there's this banner that clearly resembles the moon landing, except it's a bunch of bananas instead of an actual moon. So clearly, the moon formed differently in Bloons. I don't know. But it suggests that the space race definitely happened. Although there was no direct war between the two countries, they engaged in proxy wars like the Vietnam War and the Korean War. Now, the Vietnam War was fought between North Communist Vietnam, supported by China and the USSR, versus South Vietnam, backed by only the US. The US began a draft, but American soldiers were not well prepared for the guerrilla warfare that the Viet Cong had developed. The US even ended up leaving, causing the North to capture Saigon, the capital of South Vietnam, and win the war. Korea today is divided between North and South Korea, and Vietnam is completely communist. Another proxy war of the Cold War was the Soviet-Afghan War, which started when the Soviet Union airdropped elite troops into major Afghan cities, and lasted for 10 years, from 1979 to 1989. The Soviet Union did this to maintain order and support the new government the Soviets had installed in Afghanistan, the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan. The fighting was between the Soviet Union and the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan and the Mujahideen, which was an Islamic resistance group. Through the war, the Mujahideen were mainly backed by Pakistan, the US, the UK, China, Iran, and the Arab states of the Persian Gulf. The war resulted in the deaths of approximately 3 million Afghans, with millions more fleeing the country as refugees. In the later stages of the war, the mid-1980s, Muslim countries provided volunteer fighters known as Afghan Arabs, who wished to wage jihad against the atheist communists. The most notable among them was led by a young Saudi by the name of Osama bin Laden, whose group of Arabs would eventually evolve into the pan-Islamist militant organization known as Al-Qaeda. After the Mujahideen won the war, Al-Qaeda merged with several other Islamic organizations and set their eyes on a new enemy, the US. As the world became close to entering a new millennium, people in the US were very optimistic. As the Soviet Union had just collapsed, people in the US thought that they wouldn't have any more enemies and that they would be in an era of peace. But in the 90s, Al-Qaeda carried out attacks against US embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, and they even tried to destroy the World Trade Center, also known as the Twin Towers, by bombing the underground parking lot. They hoped that it would topple one of the towers, making it fall on them, which would kill many. However, it failed, though it still killed 6 people and injured around 1,000. Then in the 21st century, they bombed the USS Cole, which killed 17 and injured 37 to 38. A year after that, the most infamous act was carried out, the hijacking of 4 planes on September 11, 2001. 2 crashed into the World Trade Center, 1 crashed into the Pentagon, and 1 landed in the middle of Pennsylvania. It was meant to hit the Capitol, but the passengers and crew fought back, saving many more lives. The World Trade Center attack was the most devastating because of the collapsing tower. Conspiracy theorists believed it to be an inside job, as they thought that $2 trillion went missing prior to the attack. This was based off of a statement by Rumsfeld that was misinterpreted. He said, "Our financial systems are decades old. According to some estimates, we cannot track 2.3 trillion in transactions." He was saying that the technology was so old that it was hard to track large amounts of money, not that it disappeared. But back to 9/11. It was the deadliest foreign attack on US soil. The President, George W. Bush, responded to attacks by announcing the war on terror.
And we will pursue nations that provide aid or safe haven to terrorism. Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
It started with airstrikes in Afghanistan and then the invasion of Iraq. The US believed that Saddam Hussein had WMDs and had ties to Al-Qaeda. so they went in with the goal of taking him down. However, the documents which stated that Iraq had WMDs were not trustworthy. Not even the CIA trusted them. There was also no evidence that Iraq had ties to Al-Qaeda. In 2003, Saddam Hussein was captured, and then he was hung in 2006. Osama was later killed in 2011 during Obama's presidency, in a raid on his compound in Pakistan. It is strange that the US basically invaded Iraq for no reason. Many say that it was just for oil or projecting power in the region. But enough about the towers. Let's look at some of the maps, specifically Spice Islands. And as much as look like they put a bunch of random shapes for the islands, but that's actually false. It is based off of a real map of the Spice Islands, here. These islands were very important in the Indian Ocean trade during 800 to 1500. As the name suggests, the islands had many spices that other states wanted. These spices include nutmeg, cinnamon, cloves, and cardamom. Many merchants passed through the area, so the island got rich. But the Portuguese did end up invading, and eventually it caused several conflicts between European powers. There were also many other goods traded throughout the Indian Ocean trade. Porcelain and silk from China, peppers and carps from India, horses and figs from the Middle East, and ivory as well as slaves from the East African city-states. Specifically the slaves. This was known as the Indian Ocean slave trade. Many slaves were shipped to India and the Middle East, working on ports or even being soldiers. But the Indian Ocean slave trade is not as well known as the transatlantic slave trade. It was much more impactful, as around 12 million people were taken from their homes, enslaved, and sent off to a whole nother continent. It created states in Africa that thrived from capturing people and selling them to Europeans, for example the Kingdom of Dahomey. This exchange fueled the colonization of the Americas, but by the 1800s many of these societies began abolishing it. The US South relied so heavily on it that when many northern states began to liberate slaves, they worried that they would be forced to do the same. And so many southern states seceded and formed the Confederate States of America. The Civil War started after the Confederates demanded the Union leave Fort Sumter. They sent a diplomat telling them no, so they fired onto the fort and it fell within 34 hours. A few months later, 35,000 Union troops marched towards Richmond, the capital of the CSA. However, upon reaching a tributary known as the Bull Run, they were met by Confederate soldiers. So began the First Battle of Bull Run. This battle was won by the Confederates, but it was also considered to be the first major battle of the war. The Union realized that this was not going to be a swift war. In 1862, they also nearly lost at the Battle of Shiloh, as they were initially pushed back. They managed to win due to reinforcements arriving just in time. In 1863, President Abraham Lincoln declared the Emancipation Proclamation. This stated that all slaves in the rebelling states would be freed and allow black men into the Union Army. It didn't affect border states, Union states that were allowed to keep slaves, as they provided a lot to the Union's economy. During this year, the Battle of Gettysburg also occurred. It was the bloodiest battle of the Civil War, and it marked the start of the end for the Confederacy. Their morale decreased significantly, while the Union's kept increasing. In 1864, General Sherman made his march to the sea, which ended with them taking Atlanta. This further weakened the Confederacy, as Atlanta was a railroad hub and an industrial center. The Civil War ended in 1865 after General Lee surrendered at the Appomattox courthouse to General Ulysses S. Grant. A few days after the end of the war, President Lincoln was assassinated at Ford Theater by John Wilkes Booth. However, the newly freed people soon began to face racism and discrimination. A new system called sharecropping developed, in which landowners had people work on their land in exchange for living on it and getting some of the profit. Many formerly enslaved people had to return to working the land, but with slightly different conditions than before. Towards the end of the 19th century, another group began to face discrimination: the Chinese. The hero Sada has a skin that is called Jiangshi. They are basically vampires that eat babies.
You eat babies?
If you say so. Humans.
So this skin alone confirms the existence of China in the BTD6 universe. As many Chinese immigrants came to the West Coast, they began working many dangerous and hard jobs that others wouldn't. And additionally, they do it for less pay than a white person. This made it so employers were much more likely to take advantage of this cheap labor, which made a lot of white people mad. Many worked on building the Transcontinental Railroad, which basically allowed for easier trade between cities, and it continued to contribute to westward expansion. So basically, the Chinese Exclusion Act was signed because of this outrage and anti-Chinese sentiment. People from China couldn't immigrate to the US anymore. They couldn't gain citizenship, and they were able to be deported for literally no reason. The ban on immigration was meant to last 10 years, but it was extended in the 1890s. It was only repealed during World War II, as China was an allied nation. This confirms that there is racism in the Bloons universe. Now you see how much lore there is? Am I just assuming these things that happen in BTD6 because of designs loosely based off of IRL things? No, I'm not. This has been nothing but facts in this entire video, and I know it to be true. JQ clearly wanted us to find these details, so we would piece it together. And to anyone doubting this clear evidence by saying that the real world can't be connected to BTD6, you're wrong. You have been enlightened. You can spread the word about how deeply complex this game about monkeys is. And if you noticed any other connections I missed, just let me know. Anyways, see you blooners later. Peace out. The hero Sai resembles a Buddhist monk and also has Buddhist imagery, the lotus. But there's also a good chance that this is just religious syncretism or something. Because I assume that either the bloons religion is a combination of several religions, or it's just the sun religion. The US has self-relied so heavily on it that The US has self-relied so heavily on it that when northern states started to abolish it. The Civil War ended in April 1865 after General Lee. The Civil War ended in April 1865 after General Lee. The Civil War ended in April 1865 after General Lee surrendered at the Appomattox courthouse. The Civil War ended in April 16th. Okay. A hero called Sada has a skin that is called Jiangxi. A hero called Sada has a skin